So welcome to the post-lunch slot. I'm the one who will be talking while you nap, at least with one eye. I like the fact that we're a small crowd, which means that you can interrupt me at any time, especially since I will be going from topic to topic. So if you want to know more about one of them, feel free to stop me. I'm hoping that we'll have enough time for questions and everything. I've cut down my slides as much as possible. So my name is Bojan Jovanovic. I'm Bojan Z on Drupal.org, and I'm the lead developer of Commerce2.x, which is the rewrite of Drupal Commerce for Drupal 8. And I'm also guilty for Commerce Kickstart, the licensing and recurring stack for Drupal Commerce, and many others. I've contributed to Drupal 7 and 8, and I wrote the Drupal 7 versions of Views, Bulk Operations, and Inline Entity Form, and a few others.
I think
Thanks. I work for a company called Commerce Guys, and we are the creators of Drupal Commerce and Platform.sh, which is our cloud hosting solution that's supposed to make us money. We have offices. Yeah. We have offices in Paris and Ann Arbor, Michigan. Luckily, everyone in Paris is safe. We have about 30 people. We have many of them remote, myself included. I work from Serbia and go to Paris and back and forth. And so we created Drupal Commerce from scratch for the then new Drupal 7. We based it on the Drupal 7 Entity API. We used views for all of our listings, including the shopping cart and the admin listings, which was a really new concept at the time. We used rules for the business logic, the logic that you add on top. And by doing all of that, we created a system that was immediately obvious to people who already knew Drupal 7. If you knew Drupal 7, then you already knew Drupal Commerce. And we aimed for Commerce to be flexible, meaning that you should be able to take only the parts that you need. So if you don't need a shopping cart, that's fine. If you only need the product catalog, that's fine. If you need a different checkout, okay. So the idea is to be a framework to target the developer or the advanced site builder and to be flexible. Why? Because we knew that's where our sweet spot is. It's not in the super simple sites, because that's the area where Drupal has been dying for years now, because those people can use WordPress and Shopify. And if you can use Shopify, then you should always use Shopify. It's simply hosted. You cannot beat hosted. But our strength lies in the more complex use cases that really require that interaction between content and commerce with complex logic. We released Commerce 1.0 at DrupalCon London at the end of August 2011, and since then we have acquired about 64,000 live sites. And of course, this number is not completely precise. You know how update module works. But in any case, this is a record for e-commerce on Drupal in general, and I believe that we have plenty of room to grow, especially since we are now entering a new growth phase with Drupal 8, and since I believe more and more people are realizing that you simply cannot do e-commerce without a good CMS. You cannot separate the content and the e-commerce. And in those 4 years, the world around us has changed completely. PHP 5.3 happened and it changed completely how we write code. Symfony happened and Drupal 8 happened. Front-end changed completely. Simply our expectations on what makes good code or good software has changed. And if we want to be successful again, then we must start completely from scratch, reevaluate our approach, see what we did well and what we did less well, and then deliver a new solution. And this gave us a chance to reevaluate our problem space, because when you think about it, there's no single e-commerce problem, just like there is no single content management problem. Instead, it's a collection of problems. Problems such as catalog management and payments and taxes and pricing and many other things. So this meant that we could evaluate problem by problem. What was it in Drupal 7 that made this impossible to do outside of commerce, or really hard for developers to do? What made it hard for the store admin to use, and so on? All of these questions. And when you think about it, many of these problems are not Drupal specific at all. So if they're not Drupal specific, can we try and actually solve them outside of Drupal, therefore reaching other communities and getting more maintainer help? Because this has been a major topic of Drupal 7 in general. How can we make the software that we produce easier to maintain and maintained by more people? How can we make our development model sustainable? So we started with libraries first. We created 4 libraries from scratch that have no dependencies. They don't depend on Drupal, they don't depend on Symfony. You can use them with any framework that you're using. And they target the problems that we had the most issues with in the Commerce One lifecycle, and the ones that are the hardest to get right. So we created the INTL library that handles currency lists and currency formatting. We created an addressing library that handles address formatting, validation, and storage. We created a zone library which created this concept of a geographical grouping that we needed for taxes. And we created the tax library, which is our crown jewel. And the tax library has a list of many predefined tax rates, and then it has a logic for common tax use cases. And I will cover all of this from the commerce angle. But the point is, if you're doing international e-commerce sites, these are the problems that you're running into. How am I presenting the addresses? How am I formatting the currencies? How am I calculating the taxes? And these are the problems you don't want to think about. You just want that to work. But if it doesn't work, your client is the one calling you and saying, look, we messed up. And so by doing this, we not only reached other communities, but we also expanded the list of people that maintain our things. So we realized, for example, that we needed to ship with predefined tax rates for the EU, for Switzerland, for others. But it's really hard to actually maintain a list of tax rates for 30 to 40 countries. That takes a lot of effort. But since we created the tax library, we actually have several SaaS solutions using our code. And since they are SaaS solutions, that means they have paying customers, which means that their customers depend on this data, which means they are now updating our data for us. So we get more help in things that are really effort intense. And we then started on the Drupal side of things, but that also meant we needed a way to pull these libraries in. And in Drupal 7, what modules used to do, they would tell you to go to GitHub and download the library and put it into site-sol libraries, and then that would work. But those days are gone, because nowadays all PHP libraries must be installed using Composer. Why? Because of the autoloading. Composer will regenerate the autoloader so that your system knows how to find the actual classes shipped with the library. And to be able to actually do that, to be able to use Composer with Drupal, we needed to spend a lot of effort. A year ago, when we started doing this, it was almost impossible to use Composer with Drupal 8. So we took over the Composer Manager project, and we rewrote the module 3 to 4 times. And then we also worked with the core community and core contributors to actually improve the Composer support in core so that we could make each Composer Manager rewrite smaller and smaller. And a year later, and I think a month of full-time effort from my side, we are almost there. So right now, if you want to install Commerce or Address or some other modules, you can use Composer Manager, which gives you a custom command, and you run that before enabling Commerce, and that downloads the libraries for you. So it's one extra step. It's kind of painful, but it works. But the future is this. You type Composer require Drupal Commerce, and it downloads Commerce. It downloads all of the dependent modules, including Address, Anyline, and T-Form, and others, and it downloads the libraries. Because when you think about it, Composer is our new DrushMake. And it is a much better DrushMake than DrushMake is, because Composer can recursively resolve dependencies. So when you tell it install Commerce, it will say, okay, but Commerce depends on Address. Let's download that as well. But Address depends on this library. Okay, let's download that as well. And it will keep resolving the dependencies until it's all there, which means that we can now install many things with a single command. I can give you a meta project that, for example, prepares Commerce for a digital website. So I say Composer require Drupal Commerce Digital, and then it downloads Commerce and 5 additional modules that I decided I want to, instead of having a distribution, for example. Basically, what this means is DrushMake is dead, Composer is the future, and many modules, including Drupal Commerce and Address, will only be installable through Composer. So,
without Composer Manager?
Sir?
Without Composer Manager?
Yeah. So the idea is for Composer Manager to die and to be left to edge cases. So for example, if I'm developing locally and then I need to have the commerce already present on disk, I can use Composer Manager. At this point, Composer Manager is less than 200 lines of code. It's just a set of helpers for dealing with Composer. It's nothing else. all of the heavy lifting is done with Composer and with the merge plugin that's already in Drupal core. So you will install Commerce by going to the command line and typing Composer require. This is the way many Drupal 8 modules will be installed, not by downloading the tarball. And because we do this, yes, it's slightly less user-friendly, but we can provide pre-packaged tarballs for people to download, like here's all of Drupal with Commerce and modules. And this means that since we are using Composer, we can also require additional libraries. So for example, payment modules can have SDKs included. Previously, we could not do that, and so on. It simply opens us to a lot more code reuse, which will decrease the time we need to develop modules. Now, I could spend an hour talking just about Composer. So if you want to know the full story, I have a blog post, and yes, it's on WordPress. So you can go here and you can read the complete story and figure out where we are. And the best thing is that I keep this post updated. So every time core changes, I change the blog post as well. The Composer require thing doesn't completely work right now. It fails on many modules, Commerce included. But there's an RTBC patch for Drupal core that's supposed to land before 8.0 is released that will actually fix it and make it possible. So we are almost there, and I think it's a very exciting future. So let's talk a bit about the module that Commerce actually needs. Commerce is a big application, which means it has external dependencies. So the first one is inline entity form, and this is a module we created for Commerce Kickstart, and it allows you to simply edit or manage referenced entities. So if a node is referencing product, then you can create a product right on the node form. This became one of the more popular Drupal modules, and Commerce uses it to manage products, line items, and many other things. And for Drupal 8, it was adopted by the Media project. So Media is also going to use inline entity form, which means they ported it for us, which was very nice of them. So you now have inline entity form that's actually usable. It's still buggy, it's in Alpha 2, but we are fixing the bugs and we are hoping that there will be a beta release in the next month. In any case, if you need inline entity form, it's there and Commerce is depending on it this time around directly. And then there's the address module. The address module is the replacement for address field. So it provides a field for storing addresses, and it will give you a widget for entering the address, it will format the address, and it will validate it. It's production ready. We spent a lot of time on it, and I'm happy to say that we have complete test coverage, which is something the Drupal 7 module never did. So it's truly a very big step forward. So the problem we had with address field is that, of course, an address looks differently in every country. Why? Because each country uses different fields in a different order. It gives those fields different labels, and it has different validation rules. So the state might be called a province, or it might be missing. You might have a drop-down or not. The zip code might be a postal code. You might have other fields that are not displayed here. So we needed to create this concept of an address format. Why? Because address field would just throw in form alters all the time, and it became impossible to maintain. But now we have this concept of an address format, which is a config entity. And when you select the country, we actually load the address format. It tells us how the address should look, and then we use that to generate the widgets, to format the address, to validate it, and so on. So it has simplified our code and maintenance. Now, we needed, of course, a data set of address formats, and we found that with Google. Google created a data set of address formats for Android and Chrome. And we got them to agree to release it under the MIT license, and then we included that in our Commerce Guides addressing library. So the address module actually takes that data from the library and it imports it into config entities. And if your client calls you and tells you, okay, but you know, the zip code is supposed to be required, because of course it's never completely precise. We found 10 bugs in the data set ourselves. Then you can just go in and edit the configuration and save it and deploy to production, and problem solved. You don't need to write any code like you would need to with address field. We also have predefined subdivisions, which is states and cities or municipalities for over 40 or 50 countries. And when you include the fact that some, like China or Japan or Brazil, have different multiple levels of drop-downs, you get to the fact that we have over 12,000 predefined subdivisions. That's all in the data set that we use. We also have we replaced the Drupal country list with our own that has translations for over 200 languages, complete translations. So that means that if you, for example, switch Drupal to Norwegian, it will have the full translation of the country list without you needing to go and translate each country separately. And there's actually a lot of disagreement on how certain countries should be named. And the fact that we do this means that the list is more it follows the standards more closely because we actually take it from a project I will mention later on. We also have this concept of zones, which is they're geographical groupings, and they're basically used to decrease the amount of conditions you need to have in a rule, for example. Because you might say that there's one shipping price for California and Nevada, and another for the rest of the US, or for Sweden and Norway versus the rest of the EU. So a zone is a collection of countries or states, including or excluding postal codes, and we use it for taxes and shipping. So this is a part of the address module. You get a nice UI for defining the zones, and then you can really simplify any code that actually needs to check these kinds of things. I realized we needed this because I looked at the rules people were making, and they had a ton of conditions just dealing with address conditions. So this helps simplify that. Commerce used its own entity type for profiles, so an address is attached for a customer profile in commerce1.x, and then people also used profile too, so you got two different solutions for managing profiles, two completely different code bases. And we said for Drupal 8 we are not going to do that, so we joined forces with the Profile 2 team, and we actually gave the module a proper name, so it's now named just Profile. Profile 3 would have been too much. So we have a new home for that code. It's been ported to D8. It's not functional yet because Core broke it, but we have 3 contributors right now actively working on it, so I'm hoping that it will be usable within the next month. It really depends on their schedule. And the nice thing about this is that you can specify whether a profile type is supposed to have only one profile or multiple. It gives you a nice UI for managing your profiles, so basically it replaces the need for modules such as Commerce Address Book or Single Address. Time to look at commerce, of course. We've talked about our libraries, we've talked about our dependencies, but let's look at the thing we actually came to see. Let's start with currencies. So commerce1.x had a hard-coded currency list. We basically listed all the currencies we knew about, and we told people send us patches. And what we realized was that the currency list gets outdated all the time because currencies change. Because of inflation, you lose the minor units, for example, or they get deprecated, new ones get added. So our list was outdated all the time, and we needed an external source we were going to use. And we found that in CLDR. So CLDR is a project that's made by big companies like Microsoft and Apple and Google, and they provide this completely open source repository of data in JSON format. So it provides a list of all currencies translated into over 200 languages. Same with countries, same with time zones, many other things. And they have a completely open development process, and they issue new releases every 6 months. So if you realize that something is wrong, they will fix that, and then you can pull in the update. So our Commerce Guys INTL library actually includes the full CLDR currency list, and it includes the translations. On the commerce side, currencies are now config entities, which is great because for Commerce One, people actually wrote modules to present a UI for such a thing. Now it's included in Commerce. If you don't like how the pound is, I don't know, defined, you need to change the symbol or something, then you have a UI right there in Commerce. The flow is that you install Commerce and then you import a currency, which means selecting a currency from the list of currencies supported by the library, and then it creates a config entity for you, and it also imports translations. For each of your languages, we import the translated currency name and symbol. This was never possible in Commerce One. You could not have translated symbols, but we realized that actually symbols vary by language. And we also know which currencies are used in which countries. So we have the possibility to say, okay, the admin is from Norway, let's import whatever currency is used in Norway. And the system takes care of the rest. So this means that for the first time you can create a screen like this, like the one you have on booking.com, where you have a list of all currencies, and the currency names and symbols are translated into whatever language you choose. Now the system can do this out of the box without you having to do any kind of translation, which is really convenient. We also realized that it's not feasible to tie the currency formatting rules with the currency itself, because we realized that the same currency can be formatted differently in different countries. So look at the same euro amount in France, Germany, and the UK. The decimal separator, the thousand separator, whether the symbol goes in front or at the end, all of this is locale specific. Now, Drupal 8 core, with all of its multilingual improvements, doesn't have this. It doesn't have the concept of a locale, but it's very important. The locale is a combination of a language and a country. French in Canada is not the same as French in Switzerland, and those two require different rules for presenting a currency, for example. So Commerce actually had to add this concept to core. We take the current language, and then we have a pluggable process for resolving the country. We take the site's country, if nothing else, or we take the user's country from the profile, if we know it. So when we assemble the locale, we can actually use that in our widget and our formatters. So what you can see in the widget is that it actually gives me a hint for the format of the number I can enter. So because I am using my site in French, I can actually enter prices using a comma as a decimal separator. This is something that's been a Commerce feature request for a long time, never possible before now. And our formatting actually supports alternative numbering systems. So you can see how this amount looks when I switch to Arabic, because we support Arabic and Bengali and a few other numbering systems, basically all that CLDR actually supports. So we are much, much more multilingual in terms of how currencies are presented and formatted for different languages. The biggest new change, the biggest new concept in Commerce 2 is the concept of stores. We built stores to handle two specific use cases. The first one is the idea of a business with multiple billing locations. So a store always represents a billing location. And a good example of the first one is Commerce Guys. So Commerce Guys sells you platform.sh. Commerce Guys has different registered entities. We have an office in France and an office in the US, and those are separate companies. Based on your location, you're assigned to a Commerce Guys office and billed from there. So if you are from Norway, you will be billed from Paris in euros, but if you're from Canada, you will be billed from the US in dollars. And this is possible. This is the first use case we designed for, the use case where the product catalog is shared, but the store dictates the currency used and what's being invoiced, and it's always attached to the order. The second use case is the Etsy use case, where you have multiple sellers. So people can register on the site, they can create their own stores, and they can create their own products, and then they can sell that. In that case, you have different product catalogs for different stores. And we accomplished both. So a store is a content entity that stores the email, the address, tag settings, and anything else that you need. So a product can be available from one or multiple stores, and an order always belongs to one store. Same for carts. This means that we can actually have multiple active carts for multiple stores, just like on Etsy.com. If you show products from different stores, I can add all of them and end up with two different carts for two different stores. And this is an important distinction to make, because the selection of the store impacts the tax you're going to charge. That's why they need to be kept separate. Since we know the address now, we can actually use this to be really smart about figuring out which tax should be charged. We know if the store is from France and the customer is from the EU, we need to charge the French VAT. And this is something that we could not do out of the box with the earlier system. We developed this really nice store selector widget and form element that actually changes based on the amount of available entities. So if many sites will only have one store, that's normal. In that case, the selector is completely hidden and the UX is unchanged. But if you have up to 7 stores, you get radio buttons or checkboxes. And then if you have more, because for example you have thousands of users with thousands of stores, you get an autocomplete. So we have this smart widget that provides optimal UX and basically adjusts to the use case that you have. So those are stores. What we realized was that it's much easier to create a system and optimize it for multiple stores than bring that down to one, allow people to use it with only one store, than to do the opposite. Commerce1.x had no stores, and then Contrib tried to add stores, which meant doing a lot of work, and it was just really, really hard. It's much easier to say one is the special case of many. The process of getting started with commerce is now import a currency, create a store that references that currency, and then create your products. I already mentioned that we can know which currencies are needed for which countries. So we created our first Drupal console command that also allows you to do this from the command line. So when you say that I'm creating this store named Serbian store and the store country is Serbia, then it will figure out which currency is needed, allow me to override it if needed, and when I press enter, it will create both the currency and the store. This is one of the many Drupal console commands we will provide. The idea is that if you still want to use only the UI, you can, but if you want to save time, then we have console commands that can ask you questions and based on that creates the appropriate configuration for you, which means that you get a site that is more tailored to your specific use case. We can use it to create product types, attribute fields, whatever is needed. I really, really like Drupal console, and I think it's going to be a complete game changer when it comes to AAA development. One of the biggest problems Commerce1.x had was with the product model. So we had the product entities that were referenced from a node, and people really didn't like that. And we developed inline entity form to be able to do that on one form. In any case, what we're doing now is we are providing our own entity types. So we now have a product entity type, what was previously a node, that references one or multiple product variations. This is the same language and the same model you might have seen in Kickstart. And we are using inline entity form for that. And we have fixed many of the small issues that we actually had when we did this back in Kickstart. So for example, the label is dynamically constructed from the selected attributes. There's no need to install an additional module to auto-generate it and so on. An attribute is a field that's used to select a variation. So that could be the size or a color of a t-shirt. And in Commerce1.x, this could be a reference taxonomy term or a list of strings. And we've now simplified this so that it's always a list of reference taxonomy terms. So the attribute field is always an entity reference field. So there are no longer two different ways of doing the same thing, of having attributes. And we get the product model that simple. If you're selling simple products, then you always have one variation, and the variation form is a part of the main product form. Otherwise, you get this where you can actually click edit and edit the individual variations. So as I said, what you're used to from Kickstart only improved. Now, originally, we had this idea of hierarchical product models where you could define a hierarchy of your fields and then define how the values are inherited and so on. If you read one of the early commerce blog posts, maybe you've seen that. We had to give up on that idea because there were just too many moving parts and there was no way we could do that in time. But what we realized was that there is a need to support alternative product architectures inside commerce. And that's what we did. In Commerce 2, you can purchase any entity that implements the purchasable entity interface, which means that Commerce Order does not require Commerce Product. Commerce Product just provides default product architecture, and that's it. If you want to define your own entity type, and that's super easy with Drupal console nowadays, all you need to do is implement this interface that has a few methods that are specific to what Commerce is doing, and then you can just buy that. So if you want to say, make this entity type purchasable, you can. And it simply gives you a lot more power with more complex clients. We had this frequently on big projects where simply the client really wanted a completely custom product architecture. We also have a new availability API, which allows us to check whether the product is available. So you can say this product is not available because it's not in stock, or because it's available from December 1st and we are still in November. And if the product is not available, then the add to cart button is disabled and you simply cannot do it. We also support hiding the whole thing, but In any case, this is what was the Commerce stock base module, and we realized that that complete base module is basically a patch for Commerce. So now we built that into Commerce. You can provide an availability checker. It has an applies method which says, can I work with this purchasable entity type? So do I work with any purchasable entity or just the products that Commerce provides? And then you have a check method that does what you need. And this is all implemented as tagged services. So if you need to hook into Commerce, to calculate a price, to check whether a product is available, to check what the active store is, you create your own class that implements the Commerce interface, and then you create a line in your services.yaml file that has a specific tag. That's how you hook into Commerce. That's the tagged services pattern that Core is now using everywhere. Core initially started using plugins, then realized they were too slow, and now it's not using plugins almost anywhere. Plugins are now used only in places where you actually need to have configuration that's coming from configurable entities that have a UI. But when there's no config entity backing the class, we use tagged services. We also added the full UIs for order types and line item types. For some reason, Commerce 1.x didn't do this, so you needed to install additional modules. You needed to install the order types module and Commerce custom product to be able to create those. This is now in Commerce, so we have 2 less modules to port. And this means that you can have different order types that have different workflows, different checkouts, or whatever else you need to do. And it's the same story as with stores. It's much easier to design for multiple, scale it down to 1, than do the opposite. With Commerce 1, we had a lot of trouble trying to implement different order types because we realized that checkout was the same for all of them, for example. Now, this is a lot more flexible. We're also working on many different things that are still in flux, so I'm not going to show you any screenshots. Some of them are rework statuses. We realized that our statuses were too complex because they were telling you about the state of the order, the state of the payment, the state of the shipments. It was telling you about the current page of checkout, whether the order is a cart. So we had many different concepts squashed into the same thing. Now we're actually separating those into separate workflows, and we are writing our own smallish workflow solution that we still haven't finalized but are in the process of doing so. We're also fixing order level pricing. So the discount module is really complex in 1.x because it needs to implement its own mechanism for order level pricing. Commerce 1 does not have such a mechanism. We are finally fixing that in Core. We are fixing the admin UX. You know that the UI for editing an order in the admin screens, it's just terrible. So we are fixing many of the bugs we had there and many of the issues. It still looks terrible if you download Commerce 2, but we have a pretty good plan on where we want to go, and I will cover that in a future blog post. And we're also looking to improve the checkout UX. So we've done a lot of research on what makes good checkout UX, and my primary goal is to make it possible for different order types to have different checkouts, and for you to be able to swap out the checkout for something else, because you're doing A/B testing or have a special class of customers or whatever else you're doing. So you should be able to select a different form and simply use that. We tried to create in 1.x this complex system of checkout panes that turned out to be more trouble than they were worth. So we want to design something that's simpler this time around, simply a stupid form that anyone can alter, and go with that. And then, since the checkout forms are pluggable, we can later create something that's more complex and supports dependent panes and AJAX refresh and so on. But we don't want to do it in a half-assed way, the way we did for Commerce 1. I mentioned that we completely redid the way we did taxes. So we now have a data model that's designed for changing tax rate amounts. So if you say that the standard Norway VAT is changing from 19 to 20% on January 1st, you no longer need to spend New Year's Eve with your finger on the submit button, because we now have an entity type that actually has a start and end date. So the system selects the right percentage based on the date. It says, give me the standard rate of Norway's VAT for this specific date. So that solves that problem. We also have predefined tax rates for many, many countries. We've started with the EU. We also have Switzerland and Australia, and there's a pull request for adding also the Canadian tax rates. because we realize that it's much better for the merchants to have that ready, so they can just click import, select their country, and then the system is ready to handle that, and it keeps getting updated. There are no predefined rates for Norway, so I'm hoping one of you will send me a pull request. We also have tax resolvers, which are classes that determine which tax type and tax rate should be selected. Previously, this was done with rules, but we realized that this was really heavy on logic. And if it's heavy on logic, it deserves to be unit tested. And it's simply what you can write in 50 lines of code, you cannot do in 20 rules. So we now have predefined resolvers that have logic for B2B versus B2C, physical versus digital products, and many, many edge cases. Because the text library has been in use in production for the whole year, we had edge cases such as a US company registered in the Great Britain to collect EU VAT. Why? Because their accountant decided that was a good idea. So the point is that what we have in terms of taxes is something that no e-commerce solution has. And I think it's really going to be a game changer, or at least less of a pain in the ass. Because right now, many people simply need to pay for some kind of tax cloud that does all of this for them. And I think that if you don't live in the US, if you're not doing sales tax, then you shouldn't need to pay for an external service. Your application should be smart enough to handle all of these things, especially since Europe is now more complex than ever. If you're selling to Norway, you're supposed to charge Norway's VAT. And for digital products inside the EU, you always charge the destination VAT. So a French store selling to a German customer charges German VAT, but if they sell to a Polish customer, they need to charge the Polish VAT. So these kinds of complexities are what's pushing people to tax clouds, and this is what we're tackling with our new architecture. We're putting discounts in core. Commerce One.Tax had no UI for discounts inside itself. And this was a big deal because we realized that this is really important to merchants. When you talk with merchants, they really want a powerful system for discounts and offers. That's their number one thing, and that's always something we didn't pay enough attention to. So we are now fixing that. I don't think it's going to be a part of an alpha. We need to focus on our APIs first, but it's definitely going to be a part of the beta. We have no code for payments yet. We're going to write that last, simply because it's the thing you need the least, because you can always write your own payment module that's specific to what you need, or you can use the Drupal payment module. You don't need our own generic thing. I mean, you need it, but you can live without it if that's the last missing piece. What we are planning to do is have an expanded API that supports authorizations and refunds and provides generic UIs for that. In Commerce One.Tax, all of this needs to be done by individual payment modules, which means that they need to do too much work. We are also building in tokenization, commerce card on file basically, so that you can get a token from the payment provider that you can use to make recurring transactions. We are adding the concept of modes. Am I live? Am I in a sandbox? To simplify code that deals with that. And we are integrating double entry, bookkeeping, and accounting concepts to make it easier to connect to accounting systems and to make it easier to answer questions such as, what does the customer owe me, the store, versus what do I owe the customer? Sometimes the customer will pay you 100 euros and make the order, but suddenly you realize one of the products is no longer in stock and you cannot sell it. Now you owe him money. Things like that. Or some stores don't want to collect money during checkout, they want to invoice at the end of the month. So you get an invoice with all of the orders you've made since then. That's really hard to implement, and if you have a smart data model behind it, then it becomes easy to query it and get solutions, get answers to these kinds of questions. We are doing office hours every Wednesday at 3 p.m. this time zone, basically. So if you want to discuss Commerce One.Tax, your own impressions, or if you want to grab an issue to work on, join us on IRC. We are also doing weekly blog posts. So I have a blog post for currencies, for stores, and I'm publishing one for products this week. So every week I cover what was being done. So make sure to follow that along as well. And I'm, of course, available on Twitter for any questions. So let's start with those.
thanks to the work already done and the work we are going to see. But one of the bottlenecks in our company right now is a huge price update. There's how does price update become more or less painful? Because right now you have to open the whole product entity and change the price to update it. How are they going to work on the 2.x?
Well, I think that's primarily a UI issue, no? I mean, your problem is that you need to repeat the change on different entities, right? So that's something that a UI needs to be developed for, either by hooking into inline entity form or developing a bulk operation. So that's definitely something we can and should do. Please open an issue in our issue queue so we can track it. I'm guessing one of you has a question of when are we going to be able to use this? I forgot to mention that. So we are planning to have an alpha by the end of the year, which is in a month and a half. And this alpha will not have payments and will not have a discounts UI. It won't be usable in production, which means that I won't guarantee an updates path if you can be brave enough to write one yourself. But it's enough for you to create a branch of the site that you're developing for next year and start development that you can move back and forth. And the idea is to make a beta soon after that will have an updates path guaranteed that you can use to actually develop real websites. Right now, what's slowing us down is that most of the development is on me, and there's a lot of modules involved, but I'm hoping that with Drupal 8 released, the community will start paying more attention. Because right now we have a ton of contributors to the Drupal 7 version, but only a few to the Drupal 8 version.
I'm upgrading in Drupal 6. I run some UberCard, and I was actually thinking that UberCard was kind of dead for Drupal 8, but then I thought they actually did like a full migration. Do you think UberCard at some point might be, moving a little bit towards it, or is it just two completely separate projects?
To be honest, I have no idea what UberCart is planning for Drupal 8. It shocked everyone that they're not dead.
Well,
Cut the.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's because when I tried to use Drupal Commerce, I'm like, how do I add a payment method?
But still on Drupal 8, I mean, they're actually porting Ryan's Drupal 6 architecture to Drupal 8. That needs to stop at one point.
They're not re-architecting it?
No, they're not. Maybe they will. I don't know. So I haven't really talked to them. I know that the UberCart team is basically maintaining UberCart for their own clients. So as long as they have Drupal 8 clients, they will do their thing. But I think momentum is definitely on our side. So we developed this module, Commerce Migrate and Commerce Migrate UberCart, for pulling data from UberCart installs. What we learned in the process is that it's really hard to migrate UberCart because the data model was so weak, which meant that the data you're getting could be anything. So we still kind of made it work. So I'm hoping that that code can be ported to the Drupal 8 Migrate plugin, so we can actually support pulling data from UberCart installs. There is no reason not to do that. The success rate won't be 100%, but it's always good to have a start, and then you can customize that. As I said, we already did it for Drupal 7. We just need to repeat it once more. Yeah, why not?
I need to have a Drupal 6 shop.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think we need migrations for both Commerce on D7 and UberCart on D5 and 6, because why not?
Is Commerce 2.x depends on the rules?
Right now, no, because Rules is in a really early stage. So Rules now has an API, but it has no UI yet. So there's no UI for creating a rule or doing anything.
So discount module won't be sort of like a...
I talked about that with the rules people. They said they want to develop a way of embedding the rules UI, which would basically provide us the conditions part of the discount UI. But it hasn't happened yet. So I've basically postponed all of that. I said discounts won't have a UI yet. So I'm hoping that if that happens, I will be able to use it, but we'll see. So that's definitely something they're planning. They want to move away from having this central rules UI nobody knows how to use to having small, focused, embeddable UIs right there on the entity you're managing. So if you're creating a discount, the conditions are there. If you're developing a shipping service, the conditions are there. You shouldn't need to jump between two UIs and two places to configure the same thing. This is one of the things Kevin is mentioning. Like, how do I define a payment method? Well, you need to go into rules. That's a terrible idea. I mean, it makes perfect sense that, for example, for a payment method, you create a config entity, and it has conditions for selection right there, and you're done. Anything else?
Question over there, behind you.
Oh, sorry.
So I think you looked at other systems outside of the Drupal world.
Yeah, pretty much all of them.
What is the biggest competitor outside of Drupal for Drupal Commerce, and what's the argument for Drupal Commerce
Yeah.
in that context?
Well, it really depends. I think that our biggest competitor will always be Shopify. As I said, you cannot compete with a hosted solution. And it's the same reason why Drupal itself has died on simple sites, because people move to WordPress and other sites. So some people will always gravitate to that. When it comes to complex builds, it really depends. For some reason, Magento is not dead yet. Even though the community has definitely decreased and corporate involvement has been so-so, they're now releasing Magento 2, which is just as big of a nightmare as Magento 1. Like, I opened one class, it had 20 injected classes in the constructor. That it's really, really hard to follow. My personal favorite in the Symfony world is Cilius. They are creating an e-commerce system from scratch on Symfony. They're using Symfony CMF for the CMS part. They are looking into using our libraries as well to get the gains we have. They will still be an option to a hardcore developer. It's not something that the merchant will use. So the main question is, are we targeting the merchant or the developer? And as a developer, I would always go for something Symfony-based, but a merchant would probably go for something like WooCommerce or Shopify, because they're simple. And I'm hoping that with the improved UIs, we will actually remove all of the regressions we made in Commerce One in terms of user experience, which means that more people will be able to use Commerce for the simple things. Because we were definitely unfriendly to that group in Commerce One. So, I mean, for me, it's making war on two fronts. One is improving the UIs for regular people, and the second one is improving the APIs for developers. Because even the developers sometimes had problems with Commerce One because some things were too hard or not well defined. So we are now working on improving that. Was there another? Yeah.
In terms of WooCommerce, I mean, Automatic bought WooCommerce.
Yeah, Acquia is not buying us.
Can you envision something like that ever happening in the Drupal system?
No. I mean, Acquia is not buying us. I know that for a fact. So, I mean, there's nothing else to say there. Acquia really is, they wrote their own demandware connector, and they're basically chasing that kind of market where they add Drupal but connect to the previous e-commerce system, because it's usually too hard to sell people on both the CMS migration and the e-commerce migration. So they say, we will sell you a CMS, but you can keep using your e-commerce system. That's their business model at the moment. They're not really interested in homegrown e-commerce solutions, and they've never really been present inside Drupal commerce either. So that's basically because of their business model.
Okay, I
Yep.
think that was the last question. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.